there is a shift going on in consciousness and spirituality in this world that's growing. I think it's going to start being more and more palpable pretty soon. And psychedelics are great in that they kind of open our eyes to what's possible.
Welcome to the Food Matters Podcast, your home for health and wellness. My name is James Colquhoun, filmmaker and founder of foodmatters.com, and I am your host on this journey to inner and outer transformation. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a short moment to talk to you about the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program, because studying nutrition completely changed my life. It helped me to heal my father, get him off 6 different medications, lose 50 pounds, and completely regain and transform his life and health. But the problem is that we're not really taught about nutrition in our schooling system. The medical profession is rarely pronouncing the facts of using nutrition as medicine. And we have a fast food industry that thrives off misleading consumers. So if you're looking to learn about how to use nutrition as medicine to either heal yourself or a loved one or help prevent chronic disease, or you want to take that next step on your study and nutrition journey and become a certified nutrition coach, then the Food Matters Nutrition Certification Program is for you. This is a 10-week or self-paced, internationally accredited certification program designed to take you through some of the most important topics on the latest research when it comes to nutrition and natural healing, including gut healing, autoimmune conditions, balancing hormones naturally, detoxification, biochemical individual approaches to nutrition. Plus, it brings together the best that we know about nutrition science and anthropological research, and bringing these two approaches together to help you cut through the confusion about what to eat and what to avoid for optimum health. To find out more about the Nutrition Certification Program, plus to download your curriculum guide, head to foodmatters.com/study. You can pause this right now. It will only take you 30 seconds. That's foodmatters.com/study, or you can head to the show notes for more information. Have a beautiful day.
Hey everyone, it's James here from Food Matters, and today I have a friend and a guest. His name is Dr. Sri Mummaneni, and he is a preventative medicine physician trained in occupational medicine. He's also an integrative and holistic medicine specialist. He's the founder of Abundance Health, which works with high-performance CEOs and individuals and athletes looking to gain peak performance through nutrition and exercise. But what I find most interesting about Sri being a friend is that we deep dive into conversations that probably stand outside of his professional practice in many ways and his personal journey. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about how he has been able to find and sort of discover and work with some frontier medicines when it comes to healing and helping people with PTSD, other trauma-related illness, anxiety, depression, etc. And we're going to explore these topics a little bit on this podcast. So strap in, get your notebook ready. This is going to be interesting. Sri, how are you doing today?
Doing well, James. How are you?
Great. So you're a medical doctor. What was your sort of impetus story? You know, you wanted to save the world, or your parents forced you into medicine. What was how did it happen?
Well, for my ethnic background as an Indian, it seems kind of typical to become a doctor. But I have, a family lineage. Both my grandfathers were doctors. My dad is one. And, kind of growing up, I was really good at science, and I was really good at talking to people and interacting with people. And it just ended up being that's like what fit well with what I should be doing is taking a look at both science and having this deep connection with people and bringing that about. And so I ended up, not really thinking about trying anything else, but just went straight into medical school. And, I did obviously have an understanding of what being a doctor is like with my father and his colleagues and interacting with them. So, I pretty much went straight high school, college, went straight into medical school. And then once I got there, I got to really get a good picture of what being a doctor in the U.S. is like. And things started shifting a little bit once I started medical school.
What is being a doctor like in the US? What does that feel like? What's your experience been?
My experience is that, there's a pretty regimented standard in how you practice medicine now. And it's dictated by forces that seem to be outside of the doctor's control. So, in this country, it's The payment structure is set up a certain way. The medical legal structure is set up a certain way. So my early impression was like, if I don't do stuff exactly as this algorithm says, either the doctor doesn't get paid or they get into legal trouble and things. And so you got to follow the rules, and you're only allowed to do certain things. And also, we started getting deeper and deeper into something that we refer to as evidence-based medicine, which is great. You want to have some scientific data behind what you're practicing. But the way that that's written in the paradigm is that everything's heavily controlled, and it's a population-based medicine, and it doesn't really do it's like a one-size-fits-all approach. So if they do a study and it seems something worked for 10,000 people, a little bit more than random chance, then that's the thing that we're going to use for you to get better. And if it doesn't work, then I don't have an option, any other option for you. So got a little bit frustrating with that. And actually, to be honest, like I don't know what it was, but I started having my own issues, like, even like feeling a little bit depressed or just anxious about being in med school and seeing if it's really what's right for me. And I started to explore a lot of different things to do that's outside of medicine that might be better suited for me. I looked at like legal law and medicine. I looked at business stuff, quality control, things like that to see if something fit better. And I ended up finding a specialty called occupational medicine, which had to do with injured workers. But the other cool thing about it was I had to learn how to refine oil, build rocket engines. I had to learn how to make microchips, just so I know all the hazards and problems were with those things, so I can better take care of the people that worked in those industries. So that was a cool opening thing for me to do. It's a little different than typical medicine, but still got to practice and still take care of lives. So I had done that for a while, but it was still a little bit formulaic in certain cases. And so I started exploring, and that's when I ended up doing a fellowship in integrative holistic medicine at University of Arizona with Andrew Weil, and kind of opened my eyes to like, it brought back a lot of like more sacred ancient practices for healing, as well as new techniques that we're still kind of on the edge of exploring. And so it kind of opened up a path to kind of do a mix of Western medicine, which I think is amazing for acute issues like, accidents, injuries, things like that. There's no place I'd rather be than the US if I ever needed like a surgery or something to get better from an accident. But chronic conditions, long-term things, I think we're still struggling with taking care of people the best way. And so that's where I think these complementary medicines, integrative medicines are starting to gain traction, is that they're offering alternatives to chronic conditions that our traditional medical system just really can't handle right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think just reflecting on your journey and how lucky you were to, in a way, study with Andrew Weil's curriculum and the Arizona University. I mean, he was somebody I studied when I first was taking an interest in nutrition and natural therapies.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how he's helped to popularize integrative and functional medicine, maybe a little bit like Jeffrey Bland has as well for Metagetics, these
Mm-hmm.
sort of forerunners that are part of the old school, but that also welcomed this integrative approach and its efficacy. And like you said, it felt a little bit more ancient to you and probably touched into that part of us that realizes that we are tribal people on planet Earth. We've
Yeah.
just modernized our way of living, but deep
Mm-hmm.
down, we're still indigenous in a way to a land,
Yeah.
to a culture, and we've lost a lot of that connection. When, after finishing your integrative practice and, were there any other things that you had happen to you personally that sort of kept pushing you into that more integrative? I don't like to say alternative because I feel like that's
Yeah.
a disservice.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying something's organic and conventional. Like it should just be
Yeah.
organic is natural. That is food, and that everything's altered. But
Exactly.
say
Yeah.
integrate or complementary, even complementary. I mean, that seems to think like it's a condiment to traditional
A
medicine.
side dish or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Um,
yeah, was there anything that happened personally for you that sort of pushed you further into that realm, or moving away from traditional medicine and into alternative medicine?
I think it was just honestly, it was just mostly the structure of medicine today in the U.S. This insurance-based system, and it's like if you don't do what the insurance company likes, then you don't get paid, and the patient suffers. Um, way, and then also our system is very heavily reductionist. So, like if you look at something like a cholesterol medication, a statin, they basically get that from red yeast rice, and they've reduced it to a one molecule, one enzyme, to then affect change. And then the problem is they don't take into account that that plant's got other alkaloids, other things in its system to help reduce side effects that one thing might cause. So, if you just take the pill, you'll end up with side effects and issues. And statins are one of the most prescribed things on the planet right now. But there's a lot of side effects, muscle wasting, things like that that can impact people. So it was just trying to see what's out there that can kind of look at something a little bit more big picture. And then when you take it back a step further, I started seeing that we basically look at the body as this physical entity, and there's just some chemical reactions that we know majority of them what they are, and let's just basically make sure the chemical reactions happen properly, and not really looking at it from a structural standpoint. And there's more to it, our lives, than just this flesh, right? It seems to be like we neglected a lot of the energetics, frequency, vibrations, light, all these other things that impact our way of life that just aren't in accounted for in traditional medicine. And so I was just like, what else is there that we can do to help somebody be better? And even like from a mental health standpoint, I think people are like just started looking at it as mental health is a biochemical disease of the brain, where I think it's got to be much more than that. There's social interactions, there's cultural constructs, there's communities, um, you know, all those things that aren't even looked at in traditional healthcare that we seem to be avoiding. But it seemed like maybe more traditional, like ancient medicines and stuff, ancestral medicines tend to look into that a little deeper and have better explanations. So I think once they started, taking integrative medicine and applying a more scientific approach to it, we started seeing that there's actually good benefits to doing something outside of the pill and surgery techniques of modern healthcare. That like, yeah, let's take a look at this and see what else we can do to help people that's outside of the norm, and just more momentum get going that got me into this more and more. So, and then again, like the same thing, me continuously being a little bit frustrated with how traditional medicine was and not being able to offer people the right answer to what they need. Because like the solutions that we had in traditional medicine, I'd have patients come in and ask me questions that those solutions did not address at all. I was like, well, I had to go somewhere outside the box to try to help them. And if you go outside the box, then you kind of have to, you're kind of stuck to really be able to help people the best way you can, because you can, you're not, the insurance won't cover their care or won't cover treatments that's outside of some scope of practice, things like that. So it just kept moving to the point where like I need to find alternatives to traditional healthcare, so I had to keep looking elsewhere.
That makes sense. And for me, when I started to think about alternatives for my father, he was on like 5 or 6 different medications, tranquilizers, SSRI, antidepressants,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue syndrome. Couldn't get out of bed. And the first step as an alternative for me at that stage in the research I was doing was like nutrition, high dose nutrient therapy, like orthomolecular
Yeah.
medicine, this concept, detoxification, etc. And that's great. As you continue down that path further, though, we're hitting this sort of new, or let's call it like our friend Kip, like this ancient future medicine, which is it's an
Yeah.
ancient medicine, but it's also the future, which is starts to get us into the realm of psychedelics and of altered states of consciousness, and
Mm-hmm.
using plant medicine to sort of jumpstart or reboot the system for people.
Yeah.
And it seems there was a lock put on this with the whole era of war on drugs, and now we're entering a new era of emerging openness when it comes to research and use. And I think cannabis was a forerunner in that it just opened up the regulatory pathway for something that was previously,
Mm-hmm.
criminal. And many people are incarcerated in the US, which is a great travesty for small amounts of this cannabis, which is now
Yeah.
practically legal in most all states. Now we're seeing research open back up and more interest in psychedelics. And then there's a big list of other plant medicines that have sort of yet to make their way into the mainstream. What were the first ones that you sort of started to experiment with, either personally or with your patients, or read research of other physicians doing work in this space that started to show a lot of promise, some of them I think fit into the regulatory framework in the US currently, maybe
Yeah, I
ketamine,
mean,
etc., and other ones don't. So where do we start with this?
so I would say, yeah, if you wanted to start within the current guidelines in the regulatory system, something like ketamine, which it's a synthetic, it's not a plant medicine, but I think it's got a lot of the similar characteristics of some of the really ancient plant medicines do. A story is like, my father's an anesthesiologist, and he would tell me that he actually submitted a, a request to the National Institutes of Health. He was taking care of women who were giving birth, and he noticed that the women that had a dose of ketamine somewhere peripartum at the time of delivery, that he would talk to their OBGYNs later on, that these women never had incidences of postpartum depression. So he's like, what's going on with this? And he wrote to the NIH and said, hey, I think there's something here. We need to study this. You guys should get on that and see what we can do to help prevent this. Cause, there's enough anecdotal evidence to at least warrant some sort of investigation, but he obviously never heard back from them. This is probably like 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. So that kind of piqued my interest when he would tell me the stories like that. And then, once I started experimenting with different treatments that are outside of traditional healthcare, started working with a vitamin or a enzyme called NAD, which helps your mitochondria produce energy. The doctor that was training me on that offered me to try ketamine in his office, which he'd been using for people. And he says it's not just beneficial for people with anxiety, depression, PTSD, but it's also a good nootropic for people for neuroplasticity to help their brain grow in certain ways. So I had tried that for the first time, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting, because it did kind of open my brain in a certain way. So the way ketamine works now, that I understand it, is basically there's certain cells in your brain that regulate the way that information travels. Ketamine basically turns off those regulations. It basically takes the police off the road and lets your brain communicate with the whole brain. And there's no highways. You can just go everywhere. And so the brain gets to talk to other parts of the brain it never speaks to. And it opens up new pathways and new connections and resets old thoughts that really don't need to be there, that don't serve you. So it's an amazing reboot. And that was my first experience with that. And I thought this is pretty great. And then, I hear anecdotal stories from friends who say, you know what, I tried this one medicine. I had a friend that had tried 5-MeO-DMT and said this changed his life. It made him really realize how much he loves his girlfriend, and ended up marrying her. And just stories like that. And I said, there's got to be something more to these plant medicines or these other psychedelics than just a chemical reaction, right? I think that it opens up a part of us that we haven't really tapped into in a long time and kind of kept dormant for whatever reason. And so I just started experimenting. And then I started treating patients with ketamine as well. And then one of my clients told me that they, obviously I do an intake and see what kind of medicines they used in the past. He told me about something called ibogaine, which I hadn't heard of. And he described it for me and his experience and everything. And so I was so intrigued by it. I went to Mexico 3-4 days later to do it in a center there. And it's actually a nonprofit that treats special forces, special operators, Navy SEALs, things like that, who come back from combat with PTSD, anxiety, depression, etc. And I could tell you, the way the men looked on the Friday they got there and the Monday they left, it was 180-degree difference. And their facial expressions, the way they held their body, their face. One of the guys even said after he went to treatment, he came back and his dog didn't even recognize him. He had changed that much.
No
And
way.
so I took part in one of their sessions, and it was amazing. It's basically I don't know if you remember the old PCs when you had to defrag the hard drive and to restructure it. It kind of does that to your brain. It just reorganizes all the files and gets rid of the noise and all the reclusters everything, so it's nice and organized, and your brain just kind of resets. And I don't think there's anything in our traditional healthcare system that can do that right now. So, and this is a medicine, iboga, that's been in West Africa for thousands of years, that the natives have been using. So it's just something that's been around forever. It's you'll notice that if you look at psychedelics, it seems like there's one big psychedelic in like all the major continents. Like there's iboga in Africa, there's ayahuasca in South America, peyote and stuff like that here in North America. So it seems like there's some other connection that we have to these plants that just escapes modern science, and I feel like there's a reason for it, and just warrants really good investigation into what that is and how these really are helping people.
Yeah, interesting. And it's interesting that like even ketamine's in the mix because although it's a synthetic medicine, it has more of a psychoactive component to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're sort of lumping it in this sort of group of, say, let's say psychedelics or medicines that create an altered state of consciousness or a new way of allowing the brain to think, which I think is really important because what I also find interesting about this movement is that it the pharmaceutical industry was hell bent on finding, frontier medicines, extracting something from it, and then
Yeah.
patenting that substance, and then having this
Mm-hmm.
dominance over that one substance. Like, for instance, an extract of a bark is aspirin, or like you said, this red rice extract is a statin, right? So then these companies develop this patented process and this patented sort of molecule with these psychedelics like peyote or ayahuasca, or I mean these are ibogaine, or these are unlocked, natural substances produced by the earth that one company cannot have exclusive profits over.
Yeah.
And even if you think like psilocybin, for instance, there's multiple strains of mushrooms around the world. Even here in Australia where I am right now, there's this psilocybe subaruginosa, which just grows from Tasmania to Byron Bay, and that's
Mm-hmm.
it. There's these very specialist species of plants which are well known about now in the public domain, and so a company cannot go and take it. That's it.
Yeah.
It's in the public domain. It cannot be used. So I think this is a powerful idea to explore because it speaks to the concept of sovereignty when it comes to medicine and healing,
Mm-hmm.
and also indigenous healing. Like you said, these have been used for thousands of years. So can we sort of backtrack a little bit? The first one you mentioned was ketamine. So the research I've read and heard about through other medical doctors has been around PTSD, um, treatment resistant PTSD, and then patients going through one or two courses of ketamine with some support and then having incredible results. What's your experience been with using ketamine in a in a treatment environment with your patients, and also in the literature and what you're discovering?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see more and more data to support the use of ketamine. It's what I like about it is that it's not something that somebody has to take for the rest of their lives. Like an SSRI is something that somebody has to take continuously, and to even to wean somebody off of it once they've been on it is really difficult. So, just as you said, I think ketamine kind of rewires your brain and lets you think in a different way, so that you're not uh, rethinking the same thoughts over and over again and going through the same trauma with the same emotions. You're able to kind of decouple that experience with the emotion that it caused and let your brain navigate and process that. Couple that with some good coaching, integration, and therapy really lets the client open up to what that experience meant and understanding it from an objective perspective, and then being able to move forward from that, as opposed to those recurring thoughts and kind of recycling the same old past emotions that aren't serving them. They can then rewire that to actually make it more empowering. And so having both the medicine and the coaching and integration, I think, is very key in any of these medicines to get somebody to move to the next level past where they're kind of stuck. Yeah, so it's I'm just seeing more and more people doing really well with in clinic treatments of ketamine at high doses to kind of get them through a journey, and then having that experience integrated into their life, as well as at home treatments that I think you're seeing more and more startups even using at lozenges or nasal sprays for ketamine to help them reduce that same symptomology.
Do you think it's a little funny that, like, the big sort of joke with COVID, not really a joke, was like ivermectin, which is basically an anti-parasite, anti-worm
Yeah.
medicine for horses. horses, and now we've got a tranquilizer for horses as this like wonder drug. I mean, it's sort of funny, right?
I think the horses are onto something. That's what I'm saying.
Uh,
No, it's just funny that they call it that, but I think that's more of a obviously media PR thing because if you look at veterinary medicine, they use the same antibiotics, the same medicines that we do. There's so much similarities in our bodies of that of any other animal, so that yeah, to call it a horse tranquilizer and saying it can't be used for humans is tongue in cheek. It's just I think a way of saying it. So yeah, all these medicines are definitely applicable to both humans and other animals. Just obviously varying the doses and the way that they're used. But yeah, it's pretty funny though to see that for sure.
so it's essentially a tranquilizer, right? And one of the doctors I've heard speak about it talks about it as like a disassociative. So it actually like sort of
Hmm.
separates your, I guess, conscious awareness from your body, and you have this type
Yeah,
of like almost like out of body experience where your body's just laying there and you're and I
yeah.
actually experienced it for the first time, recently. I hadn't taken
Hmm.
any ketamine before, and I felt that sort of disassociative feeling. Um, in that state, you're saying that it allows more of the neural pathways to sort of awaken or think, and then you come out of this experience generally less traumatized by these past events, which keep people triggered in this like PTSD loop. Is that how it
Yeah,
works?
it gets you out of that loop. So it's basically, it is a dissociative anesthetic. So, the common ways they use it in the ERs now is like if somebody had a broken bone, they need to reset, they give them ketamine so that they can reset the bone. It's not going to really get rid of the pain, but at least they won't remember that experience the
Mm,
same way. So in that same light, it can go back into past experiences and kind of rewire it so you're not experiencing that deep pain and stuff that's going on, and so you can process it and look into it in a new, better way. So once it does uncouple that conscious mind from the unconscious mind and the body, that part of the brain can do its work and rewire and be healthy and healthier with the mind's not getting in the way and making it do the things that aren't serving us. So it lets it rewire. Then the consciousness comes back in, and then you're kind of in a new state after that's done.
and if somebody has like a traumatic experience in the past, like serving in the military, or they've had a near death experience, or my father suffered from an electrocution, which he sometimes thinks about, how do you
Mhm.
guide somebody through that? Do you guide them back to that experience while they're in this disassociative state and help them show that they're safe, or do you just let the body and the medicine do its work, and then you move in with an intention, and then you sort of reflect on that intention post experience? How does it work?
Yeah, I think intention and the setting are huge. It depends on the medicine that you're working with, and something like ketamine, you don't necessarily have to like make them relive that
Hmm.
experience, but the medicine kind of helps them reset, and then you
Yeah,
can kind of talk about it and share about it afterwards and help them
sure.
negotiate that and process that. So, which is some of the things that we don't really truly understand about these medicines is exactly how they process that trauma
Mm,
in the brain. So it's like, they call it like decades into days of, of decades of therapy and stuff that gets done like instantly almost with some of these medicines, that it just resets stuff that gets you moving in the right direction. Something like Ibogaine, my experience was that it actually took me back to my past traumas, and I was able to see them in high definition and just watch them from an objective state without the emotional attachment to it. And then after that went through, I just realized, okay, well, I can still be the way I was before those things happened. And something just clicked in my body, and my back muscles loosened up, and my belly went flat, and I stood up, and I was like taller and felt like I lost a lot of weight metaphorically. It's just a beautiful experience that I don't think we've got another way to kind of do that, replicate that in a modern healthcare way.
so
So it's
so
something that is,
transferring to this medicine now. So we've spoken about ketamine a little bit, and that was
yeah,
to do with, I guess, PTSD and trauma, and potentially also like the addictive tendencies that can come with that, right? As a coping mechanism.
yeah,
So alcohol addiction or drug addiction, or these types of heavy painkiller as well. Then people can at a relatively high rate start to move away from those substances after having some breakthrough
Mhm.
experiences with ketamine. Now we're talking
Yeah.
about ibogaine. So this is a medicine from Africa, right? I
Mhm.
believe it's the extract of a bark. Is that correct? And how do you
Yeah, it's
take
a
this
bush
substance?
root, I think, called iboga from West Africa, mostly in the country called Gabon. And it does stuff. I think we're still learning how it works, but yeah, like you said, for opioid withdrawal, like opioid addiction, it's able to get somebody off of opioids without the withdrawals, like
Wow.
instantly, which is
Wow.
something I'm still not sure exactly how that works,
Instantly.
but
Instantly.
they're able to get off of it and go home as long as they don't go back to an environment that supports opioid use. They can kind of be off the medication, you know, without having to worry about that withdrawal symptoms, which is just fascinating. The thing is, obviously impacts the same receptors in the same parts of the cells in the brain that those opioids do as well. But then again, like I said, it kind of rewires the brain and defrags the computer system and gets you reset. Um, Interesting enough, like just like I said, these veterans that have gone through all these horrible things during combat, the majority of them, their first time doing ibogaine, they would go back to childhood traumas, and that would be what they'd be resolving to then be to heal. So it wouldn't be what happened recently in these wars, but it would be like, okay, what happened as a child, early adulthood, that kind of set their brain in motion to then have those harsh negative effects, and from seeing some horrible things during war. But their original resets were all based on their childhood traumas, and then they would, if they needed to do more work, they would probably go back to recent events. But a lot of our psyche is so wired from a young age, it's just molded because we're so open and ready for anything. Any of these little things happen to us that it just kind of shapes the way we are. And it's just not that well understood yet how much the childhood affects us as adults.
Wow. And tell me, how is this ibogaine administered? So this was done in Mexico, so I'm assuming it's a controlled substance in the US. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
unfortunately, all the psychedelics except for like ketamine are all Schedule One medications, um, which means that there's no medical use for them. But I mean, you and I know there's just more research coming out day after day of how these medicines actually do have medical uses. So the reason they're still Schedule Ones is obviously just a political issue. So hopefully, sooner than later, they'll get off the list, at least to a point where they can be studied, and studied appropriately, would be great. But yeah, so it's a nonprofit. I went in Mexico. These are U.S. veterans that go. There's multiple sites across the world that does ibogaine or iboga treatments, especially for veterans. And it's an oral. It's a pill. It's like a bark. They're also the ibogaine's and actually the alkaloid, so they can do that. It's an oral medication, and then it starts working about 1 to 3 hours later, and it takes effect. And it's a long lasting one. It takes for my journey was about 20 hours when I did it. Um, so there's about 4 to 8 hours of really intense visualizations for me, where I was like watching movies of myself as a child, being with my parents, my sister, and it was like I said, it's like high definition, like I'm there, either looking at it through my own eyes or watching myself from a third person. Um, and I mean, they talk about it like this even happened, for hundreds of years. People are able to see these. So, and then there's some like integration periods where you see different shapes and figures and things shifting and stuff, and it's just more of a traditional psychedelic experience after that.
and are you in a safe space? Do you have like an eye pillow on? Is there music playing, or is it quiet? Is it a
Yeah,
dark
it's a
room? Are
safe
you with
space.
your other people? Mhm.
There was a cardiologist monitoring you, and you've got people guiding you, or not guiding, but at least sitting with you and holding space. You have an eye mask on. You're laying on a bed. Um, it's a controlled environment.
Mhm.
At least the journey that I did.
Wow, that sounds pretty amazing. Um,
I lost your video if that
okay.
matters.
Well, let's hope that it comes back. It should be okay. We're recording in the background.
Okay.
Just thinking about these medicines, I feel like the big opportunity here is like there's a lot of ways that humanity is on the brink of disaster, right? Like we've got ecological collapse, we're losing, thousands of species a year. We have energy dependence issues, and we have pollution issues, and then we have fertility issues, right? And then we've got technology and advancement issues as a species, right? And then running
Hmm.
parallel to that is these, new big opportunities in giant leaps that are about to happen, right? And there's
Yeah.
potential that energy will be free, or very, very low cost, in 50 to 100 years, right? And then I look
Hmm.
at, when Trump era, not to talk about politics, there was a bit of a restriction on immigration, and that caused the talent suck in the US. And now it's harder to get good talent for these big companies that are driving ideas forward, even though there's currently some layoffs happening, but that's a big thing. And then we look at what is the loss to productivity in the world because of depression, anxiety, mental illness, and addiction. So there is very, very, very high functioning, amazing, smart people that are addicted to opioids or alcohol or etc. that are no longer able to function in society. And so we're losing broad swathes of the population to these addictions. And we've normalized addiction in many ways. Like cigarettes are not
Yeah.
really cool anymore, but we've normalized alcohol addiction, especially in Australia. But if someone smokes now, we're like, oh, that's sort of not cool, unless it's weed. And we're like, well, that's cool. That's okay now. So it's weird how we sort of normalize these types of things. And yet it's a big drain on the population. If I think about ibogaine, ketamine, etc., being able to reset people and take them out of an addictive cycle and then unlock their capability as a human in a way to go back and be a productive member of society as a father, as a mother, as a entrepreneur or an entrepreneur or building ideas or helping people. I think this is a huge opportunity for the US and the Western developed world to be able to sort of reimagine itself and to awaken
Yeah.
consciously. I mean, I was in Indonesia the other week and they had the G20 on, and I was joking with friends about how we should like go. I was thinking the other month we should go and spike the tea there with like psychedelic mushrooms and get all of the 20 top leaders of the world, to open
Yeah.
up their neural pathways and get them off their addictions to like they're all overweight, they're not connected, in a metaphysical fashion to oneness and love and this
Yeah.
unity concept. So, do you think there's a huge unlock potential here with these medicines that we're only just beginning to see the start of, and this could be a big turning point for humanity through this pathway?
Can I take the MD allopathic doctor hat off for a second? Um, uh, which I do regularly anyway. But I think there's a huge awakening happening in general. And I think these medicines were declared illegal for a reason, um, that they are eye opening for us. Like, they kind of show us being more interconnected with each other than otherwise is seen in the media or the stories of who we look up to, right? We look up to people who are successful. They worked hard, they made the right deals, and they became the best at what they do and they succeeded. Um, you're not going to find that, I don't think, as much with these medicines where like you're like, I need to achieve, I need to be the best and be this. It's like, no, I'm connected to the people around me and I need to support myself and then support those around me and make each other grow and have a rising tide mentality. And that doesn't always fit into the narrative, that we're trying to build, right? It makes us feel like we're enough. We're exactly perfect. We're who we should be. And we're just here to enjoy this experience as a human. But it doesn't, if you turn on any TV or newspaper, all the ads are saying that you're not enough. You need to buy this thing and be better. If you don't buy this, you're going to be, you're not going to keep up with the Joneses. Your skin's going to be wrinkly. If you don't buy this, you're going to have lack. And so our whole system's based on that. So until we can shift that paradigm to like where everybody around us is beautiful. They're amazing. They all have their own individual um, beauty inside them. But as a collective, we're so much greater than the parts, which is what these medicines do. And that's why they were used in these tribal communities, because it helped bring people back into this community. Um, I think there's still that disconnect between what they see. Like, so if you see the people in the G20, um, there's industries built around selling things and keeping people addicted to things, keeping them addicted to their phones, keeping them addicted to their food, keeping them addicted to their particular lifestyles. And so, as long as things fit within those paradigms, it's okay to be drinking. It's okay to be eating fast food all the time. It's okay to do that, regardless of the health. Because, hey, we still have a whole industry on healthcare that's going to help you when you get sick from eating bad food, that you're going to then, pop into the healthcare system and we'll give you some pills, which is another industry. So if these type of medications open up our brains to and our minds and our spirits to say there's more to it than that. So I think there's always going to be this war in the short term of no, we don't want that, which is why these psychedelics were made illegal in the US in the 60s, is because people were taking them and saying, hey, I don't want to go fight in that war. I don't want to go sit in a cubicle and work for somebody else for 60 years and then retire for 2 years, then die. And they said, nope, we can't have that. Let's make them illegal. And, so that's kind of where we're at now, is like, no, these are actually something that's benefiting people in ways that we have yet to comprehend. Let's see what research we can do and bring them back in the mainstream. And there is a shift going on in consciousness and spirituality in this world that's growing. I think it's going to start being more and more palpable pretty soon. And psychedelics are great in that they kind of open our eyes to what's possible. But I don't think they're like an end all, like, oh, we should just do psychedelics all the time and it will be great. I think they're just like a little way to kind of peek over the fence and see what's out over there. And then we do our own work internally as a community, as a person, to then develop that in ourselves and be that type of person that is looking at this whole connected world and saying how I can help everybody else naturally and from the right place. So they're just little windows that are opening up with psychedelics. I'm looking forward to seeing what more can come from it. The more and more they become more accepted into society.
Nice. Really well said. And I tend to agree wholeheartedly with everything you've shared. And I remember when Eisenhower was on his way up, I don't remember it, but he's been quoted saying this. And he said,
Yeah.
I warn about the military industrial complex taking over America, right? And now we see it in
Hmm.
full swing. Even with what's happening in Ukraine right now, it's like we've committed, I think,
Yeah.
5 billion or something to there. And that's money that
Hmm.
just goes to the military complex in the US to provide that. And then they're going to
Yeah.
rebuild it. So whenever there's a downturn in the economy, it's like, let's go to war with somebody somewhere else just because it's good for business. And so people
Yeah.
are, I hope, opening more and more to this. I mean, we've published a lot of documentaries on the medical profession and the fast food and the agricultural
Hmm.
industries to awaken people to the truths there. And now I think more and more people are waking up to this military industrial complex like they were in the 60s as well, right? Which was when these
Yeah.
psychedelics were at their peak. Then the war on drugs, then they killed Bob Marley, assassinated him, because he was preaching one love. And actually, the most people going to his events were not Rastafari. It was white, impressionable young men from American culture. And so it was,
Hmm.
23, 25-year-old white college boys in the US, um, as opposed to like more of the ethnic or Rasta movement crew, which I
Yeah.
think that posed a big threat to the establishment at the time. Because wait a second, you got psychedelics, you've got this guy saying one love, everything's peace,
Yeah.
we're all one, we're all connected. And that was not the message of that creates this divisive us and them, divide and conquer sort of type of politics. So I think it's really coming back at an interesting time. And I believe cannabis has been somewhat of a gateway medicine for it to come into sort of such mainstream public accessibility over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And then we see the sort of rise in, I would say, so ketamine's been in that clinical environment. Ibogaine an out of field type thing in my understanding, and even
Yeah.
ayahuasca is an out of field. But we're starting to see psilocybin edge its way in now. So it's decriminalized, I believe, in Colorado. maybe even legal now in Colorado. And there are other states which are looking at opening up the regulatory pathways for this. So psilocybin is a component of um, mushrooms, right? Psychedelic
Hmm.
mushrooms. This seems to be probably what I think will become more and more popular. I mean, just about everyone I speak to, when you bump into a vegan tree and they just like
Yeah,
within 5 minutes they can't wait to tell you that they're a vegan.
sure.
Well, I feel like it's the same with psychedelics now. If you bump into someone that's microdosing, they're just like they can't wait to tell you that they're
Yeah.
microdosing. You know what I mean? And so it's like it's
Hmm.
become this new um, sort of popularity contest. But underlying that, I think that there is some really profound changes that people are experiencing with this medicine, this extract. What's your experience been with it? Maybe personally, or if not, seeing people move through clinical challenges with them. Maybe not
Yeah.
under your uh, practice or working with them, but you've seen them move through it. What's your experience with this medicine, and how do you think it's going to impact and evolve in the US and the West in the coming 10 years?
Um, Yash, it's so interesting. Like I just got a text today from somebody who said, "Hey, I haven't touched a drink in months because I started microdosing. I don't even think about alcohol. I actually identify as a non-drinker." And this is somebody who's been drinking for a long period of time. So it's just amazing to see the type of changes something like that medicine can do. I think we're at the point where we're starting to see more legalization. From a cynical point of view, I think there's the right people who are starting to profit off of these type of medications like cannabis and stuff, and then allow it to be mainstream. So we're going to see that more and more. Psilocybin is it's so easy to even make. Like people can grow it in their own home. So you're going to start seeing it more and more that way. I think um, just from a sheer mental health perspective, there's studies coming about that one dose of psilocybin is better than doing years of other antidepressants. It's just going to just keep steamrolling, right? The more data we get, the benefits. And fortunately, now there's more medicine or more money being put into research that people will acceptable research that people will actually be able to use. And just like cannabis, where the individual states were able to uh, decriminalize, I think you're going to start seeing more and more states doing the same thing. We've got cities in California that are decriminalized. We've got Oregon, Colorado. I think New York is coming online, and I think even some of the more conservative states are having bipartisan regulations put in to allow for decriminalization of psychedelics. Honestly, I believe a big part of this is going to be the veteran community. We have such a love and admiration for our veterans that the changes that we're seeing from the men and women that come back from war and the struggles they have and how they're able to shift to being happy and productive and not productive but happy and like actually re-enter their communities. That's going to be a big part of this shift into allowing these medicines into our mainstream. I think so. I'm excited about what's to come. I think that it's going to be um, just more open to allowing these things. Like I think there's still going to be pharmaceutical companies and still venture capitalists who want to reduce the medicine into something that can be patented, that can do that. But along with that, the whole plants and whole fungi are going to be there that people are going to be using to inflict that change. And I think it's an exciting time to see that it's starting to gain traction. And you've got people who you would never expect. Guys in suits from Wall Street are doing ayahuasca now, and it's not just like tech bros in Silicon Valley. It's you start seeing more politicians even talking about their experiences with psychedelics. Um, I do see some resistance. Obviously, there potentially could be resistance in an organized religion as well. Psychedelics might, again, anything that sets up rules or rigidity and structures around what's right, what's wrong, what you should do, shouldn't do, um, are potential walls or barriers for psychedelics. But I think there's a lot of promise. Like I said, I think there's a shifting consciousness now towards this oneness and how we're all linked, not just as people, but as, earthlings or as just beings on this planet, So, and I think the younger generations are way into that much more than our generation was. And they're kind of expressing that they're not going to tolerate that kind of thinking of the separateness and allowing for industry to ravage our environment, things like that. So with that whole movement, I think we're going to start seeing more and more things come out. Psilocybin, I'm excited about, like I said, because it's easy to farm and to acquire. It's for whatever reason this seems to be more acceptable of a medicine for people to do. People have had experience with it, probably like in college or things like that. I would say, and that's one thing that we have to be mindful of is that the misuse of medicines like these for recreational use, where it's not really used as a therapeutic, could be a distraction or ways for people who are against this type of medicine to say, "Hey, look what happened! This person did mushrooms," and they come up with some anecdotal story that's irrelevant, but still can use it to limit it. So I think when they're used in the right setting with the right intentions, they're very powerful and are going to impact change in a positive way.
One of the things you said, I think, is quite ironic is that, we touched on, and it wasn't planned for this interview, this idea of this military industrial complex and all these inherent structures in our modern society that we've been told are true. And medicine operates like this,
Yeah.
insurance industry, finance industry, military industrial complex. And then when you take these medicines, it sort of shatters all those complexes in a way, those external and internal structures, and you become more open to a new way of thinking and being, or at least it shows it to you for a moment. And then as you come back to life, like you said, you should develop and continue practices which allow that to be true for you, whether it's mantra practice or yoga or breath work or eating well or having some form of tapping or affirmation based practice to sort of lock in your
Mhm.
higher state of awakening, right? But it's ironic that like it's now considered like a treatment for these returning service people.
Yeah,
That this was the thing they sort of stopped that was opening the population to this anti-war idea, and now it's
yeah.
helping treat the veterans. So that's really interesting,
Mhm.
right?
So I think a good analogy to that too is, it's like it stops you from wanting to go to war and also takes care of you when you come back. The thing that our healthcare system lacks now is actually keeping you from being sick in the first place. It's like, let's get you not just being healthy, but let's get you to be your peak self. And, I think these medicines tell us that, yeah, you shouldn't be fighting. There's no need for this violence and this thing anyway. But, oh, yeah, by the way, if you ended up having to do that, let's take care of you afterwards. So it's an interesting metaphor that you brought up. I like that. But I just look at it; they're here to help serve us and make us better people, and whether it's before or after something like that. So yeah, it's great to see that there's actually opportunities. I mean, we have a huge problem with 22 veterans kill themselves every day in this country, um, and I don't see why we just don't open the floodgates and do everything we can to possibly help these men and women be healthy and um, be as grateful and thankful for their service as much as possible by giving them a full carte blanche and allowing them to get whatever treatment they need to get better.
Nice. I love that. Can we finish with a few rapid fire, super practical questions or relatively rapid fire? So,
Sure.
people new to this, first of all, and probably open to exploring it, maybe they're suffering from trauma or depression or anxiety or addiction. They drink too much or they can't stop smoking, whatever it might be. And they're like, wow, I'd like to try this. I'd like to be
Mm.
better, right? Self improvement and healing. But then there's fear, right? I was fearful before I tried my first like psilocybin
Mhm.
experience, and it's become a friend now, and I can interact with that in a different way. I was shit scared before I tried ayahuasca, not gonna lie,
Yeah.
but then it
Yeah.
eases you into it, and you're like, wow, this is actually really amazing and scary and beautiful. What do you say to people that are apprehensive about dipping their toe or wetting their beak when it comes to interacting with this? And what would you suggest as like a pathway or a process for people that are looking to get started in this?
Well, I do want to say that I think you should be ready to try any of these medicines, meaning like it's called to you or you're like in the right place. If you're terrified of them, if you're fearful, if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't sync right, I would not recommend doing them. Because if you go into it with that mentality, that intention, then there's a possibility that could potentially give you an effect that you undesirable outcome. Um, but I think the more you talk to people that have been doing them, that have had positive experiences, um, you see that it becomes more mainstream and tolerated. There's ways to kind of step into it with smaller doses and increase dose over time. Make sure you work with a practitioner or a shaman or somebody who's experienced that you trust, that who you've had a chance to interact with people they've worked with in the past to know that they do good work. It's something they've done for a long time. It's not somebody who just, the problem like here in LA is that you'll see ayahuasca everywhere. Like somebody just goes and does ayahuasca once and they come back and they like find some and they all of a sudden they're shamans and they offer it here. So you want somebody who's actually knows what they're doing, is really good at both serving the medicine and knowing when somebody is having uh, an experience that is um, not ideal, that they can actually talk them through it and work them through a bad experience and turning into a healthy good one. And that's what shamans have been able to do, is they know when something is right and when something's wrong and able to steer you in the right direction. So that's where I think when these medicines go right, they're great, but it's having somebody experienced enough to know what happens when it's not moving in the direction that the person had intended, but then you can shift them to something positive. So as it gets more commonplace, you'll start helping people with that fear. As if you go to a practitioner that's well qualified, that's been doing this for a long time, I think that's going to help assuage some of those fears as well. Um, and over time, I think people are going to get more and more used to it. A lot of times people come to it because they've already tried the traditional medicines, they've tried therapy, they've tried all these things that just nothing helped them enough. So they're what we call treatment resistant, and they say, okay, let me try something else. Um, but if you've got somebody you trust who can kind of hold your hand and walk you through this process, um, the outcomes tend to be pretty beautiful and positive. So I would say make sure the person you're working with is really knowledgeable, understands, and they aren't something to be taken lightly. Like I wouldn't say just try a. I hear people of like trying 5-MeO at a party. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. It's such a powerful medicine that it's not a recreational drug that you would do like that. So you got to be careful. And like I said before, make sure that you have the right intentions, the right setting, the right thoughts to going into it, and doing it with the right people in the right environment. It's what's going to make them the most powerful. So um, over time, I think people are going to get more and more used to it. If you're even more concerned, then I would say, yeah, start with something like ketamine that's, in a clinical setting, if that makes you feel more safe. And then if that doesn't serve you as much as you'd like, then you're probably be open to trying other medicines. We've got ketamine clinics all over the place now in the U.S. So, but I would say make sure you work with somebody who does offer integration and coaching. A lot of the clinical ketamine clinics don't have that. They kind of just serve they give you the medicine and in an IV or a shot, and then send you out the door. So I would say get some coaching both before and after the medicine to help integrate it, because otherwise you'll just do the medicine and you go back to your original state and nothing really changes. So you need to have somebody walk you through the process and develop something better.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. And as I've journeyed with my own experience, I've come across more and more people saying that, yeah, like you said, having that clear intention, a safe space, the right setting before interacting with any of these types of substances you're talking about can help you achieve better results. And then
Mm-hmm.
having that post experience integration, journaling, sharing, guidance, support, etc., can
Yeah.
be really important because you're so open in a way, let's say neurologically, that you can lock in
Mm-hmm.
so much new thought, I would say, in a way during that experience. I think it's a little bit, I would probably liken it to maybe hypnotherapy, right? Where under these states of like
Yeah.
deep relaxation, you're able to suggest to the subconscious, hey, stop smoking, you stupid idiot, whatever it might be. And that the subconscious
Yeah,
is able to receive that differently than when you're in a conscious state of being. And so these altered states of consciousness that we can achieve through these medicines can help us to sort of reprogram ourselves, or like you say, like reboot the hard drive. And having that
sure.
coaching and support, super critical. Totally agree. One other analogy I got given before my first experience with ayahuasca was this idea that you're you're getting on a train, and that train is going to a destination, and once you get on it, you can't really just jump off. You just have to relax into being on that train and that journey and being okay with that. And it was interesting. There was a few other people in the group that I went with. It was a guided experience that were very resistant to the experience, very fearful, very closed up, and they actually didn't experience much either. And
Hmm.
then the three of us that were very relaxed, very open, being like, wow, very exploratory, like, wow, show me, this is going to be exciting, had big experiences. So I wonder whether that sort of mental preparation and guidance, and I was coached into this state of being just being open. You're getting on this experience, just relax,
Yeah,
breathe, and go with it, and it will show you, and you'll have this. And that was very true for me. And the people that were more resistant didn't have those experiences. Do you see that in the circles you've sat with, or the people that you've worked with or seen go through these experiences?
100%. I mean, if you look at it, even just in life, right? If you're like, if you go into an event and you're like, oh, this is gonna suck, this is gonna suck, this is gonna suck, it most likely will. It's gonna it's got this huge barrier that it's got to get over for it to be awesome. If you're going with such a hard negative attitude, so if you're like, oh, I don't want this to do this, I'm afraid, I don't like this isn't gonna work. Yeah, you're not gonna have a great outcome. So in anything, so especially with these medicines, surrender is a word that's a lot of people struggle with. It's a state that a lot of people have trouble with because that lack of control. And I think just opening up yourself to allowing the things that need to happen is something that it's a skill that you maybe have to prep for or have to work on. But once you do these medicines, you learn that over time. But it is something that's useful to walk into that situation with, to to know that you're going to have a positive outcome and not have, I would say, definitely don't have a set expectation, but have a good intention. And then, the medicine gives you what you need. You're not the one that's telling the medicine what to do. It helps give you what you need. And honestly, all of it is really you. You're the one that's doing the work. Medicine might just help be a guide or a facilitator, but it's your body, your mind, your spirit that's doing the work. So just like any of these other traditional medicines, you give something, it kind of holds off something in time for your body to fight. Like, antibiotics just kind of hold off an infection in time for your body to fight it off, right? You're still doing the work, but it's just more of a guide to let you do that, a roadmap or whatever analogy you want to use. It's just a way for that you're still the one that's doing the work. So the more open you are to doing that work and allowing yourself to receive, allowing yourself to give, allowing yourself to surrender, and kind of let go of that expectation of that need for a result or an outcome, the better you'll have of an experience.
Beautiful. I love that. Amazing. Dr. Shri, thanks so much for your time today. Really grateful for our friendship and that we got to connect through our dear friend Kip, and excited and grateful for the work that you're doing in this era of emergent psychedelics into the marketplace. And I think in the next 5 or 10 years, my big prediction is these will be very much more mainstream than they are now. And I'm hopeful that they provide a big unlock to humanity as we move from this sort of material based, reductionist based way of thinking to a more spirit, energy, um, oneness, and united consciousness way of thinking. And I feel like these plants are ready to do their work. So I see you as a champion in this space, and excited for what you're going to bring to the world in terms of awareness and experience. So thanks so much for your time today and for coming on the podcast. I really
Well,
appreciate it.
thanks for having me. I love to share. I love what you're doing, and open this up to everybody, let them understand what's going on and educating everybody. So thank you.
For everything that we've mentioned in today's episode, you can check out the show notes. There will be links and information there for you. And before I go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to invest in yourself and be here for this podcast. If there's anybody that you can think of who could benefit from this information, please make sure to share it with them. We believe in the power of life-changing information, and it's especially powerful when it's shared from a trusted source. And finally, if you could leave us a comment or make sure to subscribe to the podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. It helps us continue to bring you this life-changing information, and make sure that you get all future podcast updates sent to you. Have a beautiful day, and thank you once again.